Sometimes when you think you've committed the perfect crime, there are always things that are left undone. I'm Tyrone Bowman. This is Tyrone Bowman Tonight. Alex Murdaugh has been found guilty of murdering his wife and son in June of 2021, according to Crime and Reports as reported by TheState. Alex Murdaugh, the fourth generation heir to a powerful Low Country legal, law enforcement, and political family, was found guilty Thursday of murdering his wife and son in a case that brought the glare of national and international media attention to a long secluded but corrupt corner of Low Country, South Carolina. A jury of 7 men and 5 women took less than 3 hours before unanimously finding Murdaugh, 54, guilty of 2 murders. The execution-style slaying of his son Paul, 22, with a shotgun inside the feed room at the family dog kennel, followed by the gunning down of his wife, Maggie, 52, with a high-powered rifle on June 7th, 2021, at the family 1,770-acre rural Colleton County estate called Moseley. Their verdict endorsed the prosecutor's version of events that Murdaugh was a powerful man who lived a hidden life of lies and betrayal while embezzling millions from law partners, clients, family, and friends, and that pressures created by the imminent exposure of his secret world drove him berserk and caused him to kill his wife and son. Murdaugh, a disgraced lawyer who faces life in prison, stood stoic as the verdict was announced in the same courtroom where his father, Randolph, and his grandfather, Buster, brought cases as the circuit solicitor against thousands of accused criminals over the years. Murdaugh's great-grandfather, the original Randolph Murdaugh, was solicitor from 1920 until his death in 1940. After a poll of the jurors found the decision to be supported unanimously, Murdaugh's defense team made one final move to have Judge Clifton Newman set aside the verdict and declare a mistrial. The evidence of guilt is overwhelming, and I deny the motion, he said before telling the jury. All the evidence pointed to one conclusion, and that is the conclusion you all reached. Newman said he would delay sentencing until Friday morning, noting that many people will likely have something to say. Newman can sentence Murdaugh from 30 years to life in prison for each count of murder. He is known as a tough sentencer who often comments on the crimes committed by those found guilty before him. Murdaugh was remanded to the custody of the Colleton County Sheriff's Office, who have held Murdaugh in the county jail throughout the 6-week trial. Deputies had Murdaugh put his hands out, and then in a short burst of metallic clicks heard around the courtroom, handcuffs were put on the former millionaire and now disbarred lawyer. One of Murdaugh's lawyers, Dick Harpolitan, said after the verdict he was disappointed and would have more to say after Newman passed his sentence Friday. The verdict in Murdaugh's trial marked the closing of one chapter in a multi-dimensional story that has encompassed major financial fraud, drug trafficking, tax evasion, and the fall of the Murdaugh political and legal dynasty, which for 4 generations had reigned supreme over a wide swath of South Carolina's Low County. For 6 weeks in the 201-year-old Colleton County Courthouse, some 90 miles south of Columbia, lead prosecutor Cretin Waters pulled together a case with one major hurdle: no direct evidence. In the case brought against Murdaugh, the South Carolina Attorney General's office had no direct evidence, such as fingerprints or DNA, that would have clearly linked the defendant to the crimes and allowed the state to conclusively prove Murdaugh's guilt. Even the weapon used to kill Paul and Maggie were missing, hidden or destroyed by Murdaugh, prosecutors contended. To overcome that hurdle, prosecutors introduced hundreds of pieces of evidence ranging from police interrogation videos, gunshot residue tests, car and cell phone data, and most importantly, a cell phone video taken from Paul's room that showed Murdaugh at the dog kennels in the minutes just before his wife and son were murdered. Murdaugh had repeatedly told investigators that he hadn't seen Paul or Maggie for at least an hour before they were believed to have been killed. The digital data along with Paul's video showed Murdaugh to be a liar and shredded his alibi of being somewhere else at the time of the killings, prosecutors contended. Murdaugh's alibi was that he quickly drove to his ailing mother's house in a nearby unincorporated community, Almeda, where he visited with a caregiver and lay on his mother's bed for 30 to 40 minutes as a game show played on the television. He then told investigators he drove back to Moseley, where he found the bodies of Maggie and Paul, and called 911. After major hurdle faced by prosecutors, another major hurdle faced by prosecutors was the apparent lack of a motive to make understandable to the jury why a seemingly happy family man such as Murdaugh might kill his wife and son. Waters introduced a theory called family annihilation, which says that an outwardly successful person who has lived a hidden life and suddenly faces exposure might suddenly kill those closest to him. To prove this theory, Waters introduced some 9 witnesses who testified that Murdaugh for years had lived a secret life of fraud, stealing from friends, families, colleagues, and his law firm, bilking them of millions of dollars. Waters also showed the jury that Murdaugh on the day of the murders was on the verge of being exposed as a debt-ridden criminal instead of a prosperous, respected lawyer. Evidence also showed Murdaugh had lured both Paul and Maggie to Moseley the night of the killings. In hopes of countering the theory of family annihilation, defense lawyers Harpolian, Jim Griffin, I know I screwed it up, Phil Barber, and Margaret Fox introduced witnesses who told the jury a different story, that Murdaugh had been a loving, devoted father and husband. Witnesses also gave undisputed testimony that the Murdaugh family had a seemingly idyllic life at Moseley, creating a kind of a low-country Camelot, teeming with game. That was a magnet for Paul and Buster, Paul's older brother, and many of their friends. At Moseley, the sons and their friends apparently had unlimited ammunition to hunt turkeys, ducks, hogs, and deer, shooting as much as they wanted. Maggie, although not enamored with life in the country, enjoyed being with her 2 sons and their friends at Moseley and going on trips with Alex and the boys, witnesses says. Shortly after 7 p.m. Thursday, some 3 hours after Judge Newman charged the jury with the laws that governed the case, and some 6 hours after prosecutors, John Meadors, an old-fashioned attorney known for talking to juries like a fire and brimstone preacher, made a final pitch for guilt, the jury finally spoke. The forewoman, a white-haired woman in her 50s, handed slips of paper on which the verdicts were written to Judge Newman, who in turn gave them to Culleton County Clerk of Court Becky Hill, who read them aloud to the partially filled courtroom, and thanks to the live broadcast by Court TV to the nation and world. Newman then allowed jurors to leave the courthouse by a back entrance after thanking them for their service and telling them they were free to talk about the case or keep silent. Jurors were paid $20 a day for their 28 days of jury duty, according to Hill. The jury also found Murdaugh guilty of 2 counts of using a weapon and a crime of violence. Jurors appeared to be ordinary, working-class people dressed in comfortable, informal clothes. One man who appeared to be like in his 20s wore a coat and a tie for the entire trial. Among them were a student, a letter carrier, a pharmacy technician, a warehouse manager, an employee of a truck accessory store, and a payroll processor. At the heart of the widespread media interest in the latest generation, Murdaugh was a long-running whodunit mystery that quickly attracted national and international attention because of the brutality of the Maggie and Paul's execution-style murders or killings, the prominence of the victim's family, and the seemingly helplessness of the SC Law Enforcement Division to identify even one suspect for more than a year or advance the theory of what had happened. for 14 months until Murdaugh's indictment on murder charges in July of 2022. Neither SLED officers nor prosecutors from the South Carolina Attorney General's office would comment on evidence in the case or law enforcement's highly publicized failure to make an arrest. We already know why. It's no secret and no mystery there. Interest in what became known as the Murdaugh murders case was heightened when 3 months after the killings early in September 2021, Murdaugh was fired by his law firm, which publicly accused him of misappropriating client funds. At the trial, one of Murdaugh's law partners revealed that Murdaugh had embezzled more than $10 million from the law firm and its clients, and although insurance had compensated some of the firm's clients for their losses, firm members had to borrow money to reimburse other clients. A day after he was fired by his law firm, Murdaugh staged what SLED later called a fake suicide in a botched attempt to have his life insurance pay $10 million to his only surviving son, Buster, who was not in the scheme. SLED charged Murdaugh with financial fraud in that alleged crime. In late 2021 and on into 2022, Murdaugh was repeatedly indicted on multiple counts of financial fraud by the state grand jury. Members of his former law firm known as PEMPED, after Parker, Murdaugh's Peters, Ethroth, and Dietrich, created a new firm and rebranded themselves as the Parker Law Group. It was a sign that the Murdaugh name, once respected and even feared among the Low Country's 14th Judicial Circuit for more than 100 years, was now tainted. The full extent of Murdaugh's alleged financial frauds still are not known. He also faces charges of evading some $486,000 in state taxes on the millions he stole, as well as drug trafficking charges, according to indictments. The murders had taken place at night. The crime scene had been overrun by Murdaugh's friends and family until it was sealed off, and there were no witnesses except the family's dogs who barked at investigators from their cages. The state was never able to produce the murdered weapons, a shotgun, and a .300 black assault type rifle. Facing life in prison without parole, Murdaugh has seen witness after witness testify how he has stained the name of his family that has been woven into the fabric of the 14th Judicial Circuit for more than a century. Today, Murdaugh has become shorthand for wickedness, and the firm the family founded in 1910 was dissolved and reformed without the Murdaugh name. In testimony that was in turn tearful, defiant, and litigious, the disbarred attorney denied killing his wife and son. But in 5 hours of cross-examination by Waters, Murdaugh offered a stunning series of admissions. He confessed for the first time to lying about his alibi and to a decade's worth of thefts from his clients and his law firm, which he said was driven by a need to fund a $50,000 a week addiction to prescription pain killers. Even before he took the stand, Murdaugh's defense team had little room to maneuver. Newman granted the prosecution's wish list of motions. He allowed them to introduce a landslide of witnesses who testified about Murdaugh's financial crimes, leading Harpootlian to protest that it was more of a Madoff trial than a murder trial. Bernie Madoff was imprisoned for orchestrating a $64.8 billion Ponzi scheme, the largest in history. While not required to prove motive, Waters repeatedly accused Murdaugh of being a family annihilator, driven to commit a biblical act of destruction when the facade of his successful life began to crack. To be continued. I'm Tyrone Bowman. Never surrender. Never quit.